Hello, Chris.
Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Welcome to the show, Chris.
Are we doing this hostless today?
Oh, we won't be hostless. I mean,
We might be hostless.
Big Al, unfortunately, Big Al can't be with us today. He'll be back next time. But we aren't alone.
Are we not?
No, we're not. We're not.
Oh, here we go. I do have an echo. I can hear that now. Wow, look, it's Johnny. And the
Machine Hughes and the 13th Crusader.
Good God.
Buenos dias.
Oh, Johnny's going gray. I see it now. Yeah, shaved my gray hair.
Oh, come on, that's all of us.
All of us.
What's this going grey? I've been grey for like the last 20 years.
Oh, really now? Wow.
I'm not in that club, unfortunately. Well, I have like 13 little hairs on my goatee, but it's under my arm.
Okay, that's perfect. That's perfect.
You keep your little grey hairs to yourself, 13.
No
one wants to see those bad boys.
Wow.
He's brushing in the Grecian 2000 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So thank you for having us on. I really appreciate it.
Hey,
you guys.
Definitely.
Nice. It's nice to have a change, and I think the subject matter for today is probably going to have lots of different opinions and lots of different thoughts on. So,
yep.
Hey, look! We have a troll in our chat. His name is Elmiga. He's posting something.
Damn it! I thought we were shot of him today. I mean, I'm sorry.
We need to delete this. Yeah. Okay, guys, if you want, post away. We are live, and if you have any questions, please send us your questions.
Actually, that's it. That is a good point to start before we leap into this subject today. One of the things that we've been talking about, particularly Chris and myself, is all of these podcasts we normally do. We do try to go for the hour, but we've never actually managed to do it, and it tends to be 2 or more. But what we want to do is a series of short fire podcasts that are like 15 minutes to half an hour. So if there's something you want us to review, if there's something you want to talk about, if there's something that you feel we can shrink down to about 15 minutes, half an hour, please let us know. You know us on Twitter. Reach out to us. Give us some subjects. And
this man, Dave, he put together a wonderful, wonderful teaser for that one. We will post later to remind you. And here's the other news. These 20 minutes short episodes will not be hidden behind a paywall. We are not on Patriot. We are not hiding those behind a paywall like some other podcasters. They will be free for you because we want to give to you wonderful people out there.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you are not getting any money, Dave.
Oh, what? Oh, my God. Oh, damn. Oh, I was going to make it rich.
Yeah.
Make it rich.
You need to do a couple of graphic novels for that. I think you are going to do that. Are you not?
I am indeed.
Oh, look here. You want to tease something?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
No? You want to tell us about this? Do you want to tell us about this cover you got in the mail?
Oh, I can't tell you about it. I mean, actually, do you know what? I can't tell you anything about it, really. Other than it's by the artist Art Germ. I'll tell you that much. Can't tell you what it's of.
So it's Art Germ, so it'll be some sexy woman doing something then.
Powerful woman, kick-ass woman.
Yep, something along those lines.
I hope it's a Power Girl. Bring back Power Girl. There you go.
Oh, hey, you took it to the wrong guy. You need Jimmy and Amanda for that.
Yeah, we had Jimmy on. Jimmy was was very gracious with his time. He came on our podcast. Jimmy Pagnotti, thank you again.
Yep. Yeah, he's a good man.
Cool. Oh, he is.
So let's go into. We're talking about Steve Ditko today, But we're not only going to be talking about Steve, because I think, our focus here is, as probably a lot of you have heard, we know that Steve Ditko is no longer with us, but his estate is, and they filed to basically termination of copyright at Marvel, so they can reclaim their ownership, or at least their part of the ownership in Spider-Man, but also Doctor Strange.
Right.
So I think before we get too much of that, we really don't want to hit 2 hours. Let's go straight into. Chris is going to give you a lot of the background, because I think that it needs to be shown that Steve Ditko has always been a top-notch creator, not just for Marvel.
Right.
His creations go back, his efforts go back way before that. So I think, Chris is going to give you lay the groundwork and take you up to sort of like some of his Marvel work, and then I'm going to sort of like I think we're going to cross over a little bit there, bit of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, but then I'll touch on a little bit of what he was up to after he left, and I think that from there we're going to discuss where we think he stands on all of this, and not only him, but there's other creators, and how sticky and tricky the whole copyright trademark situation is.
Right.
Was that a pun?
Not a deliberate one, but I'll take it.
Going to tell you about those web shooters later. Going to blow your mind on that one.
Yes.
So let's get into this, because we will talk a little bit more about the current situation later, but let's start a little bit in the past and start with the first slide, if we may. And we get to this bad boy here. That's our friend Superman. I mean, you're all familiar with the legend, and it's sadly a true story that Siegel and Schuster tried to get this sold to newspapers. And there's a little bit of explanation here. Why would they sell this to newspapers? Newspaper artists, cartoonists, they were called. They were making a tight sum of money. Hal Foster, Milt Kenneth, they were really, really getting a lot of money for their syndicated newspaper strips. And they had a lot of fans and were held in high esteem. Newspaper cartoonists were the heroes of the cartooning trade, versus comic book artists were like, they were the freaky cousins you wouldn't want to talk to at a party. And so after they couldn't land a job at a newspaper, and if you look at this art, no offense to my friend Joe Schuster here, but that was not ready for prime time. But it was ready for prime time for the comic books. And there's a long convoluted story, and I will make it very short. Eventually, this landed on the desk of the editor of National Comics, who passed it on to his boss, Jack Leibowitz, who passed it on to his boss, Harry Donf, and they said, okay, let's buy this. And they bought it for $130. And there's this long-held belief that they were shown the door, Siegel and Schuster were. No, the National Comics, DC Comics, they were very interested in retaining the talent. And they paid them a 5-figure sum in the 1930s for them to work on this strip. They wanted the creators on this strip. And Siegel and Schuster hit the big time. They went to the nightclubs, they partied, cool times. They never really thought about selling the rights for $130, because they really were like, okay, we can come up with another idea and sell it for more money, no worries. But eventually, the money they were paid was never enough. You buy a house, you party, you marry, not enough money. And the problem was they hit on a shady lawyer who told Jerry, oh, I can do something about you. We can get this deal reversed and you get the rights back, or they have to pay a lot of money for this. Unfortunately, they lost that lawsuit. And unfortunately, DC said, okay, we give you this one chance. You're young guys. We give you a new contract, you stay on, you keep working for us, but you will sign that you will never sue us again. Unfortunately, once again, money ran out, and they sued DC again. And this was the time when they were kicked out. So it's not true that DC treated them harshly from the beginning. They bought the rights to this for very little money. It was a risk. Siegel and Schuster agreed to the $130. They were kept on a retainer. They were working. They had newspapers articles written about themselves. But they kept suing DC, and eventually they were kicked out. Many years later, Neil Adams helped to restore their byline. That's a different story for some other day, but this is the story of Siegel and Schuster. Now, if you go to the next slide. Now, another Superman, Batman. Here we go, the big Batman. Now, Bob Kane submitted his pitch, which his friend Bill Finger had reworked for him. And this was the Batman. And again, Bob Kane struck a shitty deal. He said, okay, $150, no trouble. I'm happy you like the Batman. Bob Kane came home to his parents and said, oh, look what I've done. I sold the rights to my first character. And his father looked his son in the eye and said, you're an idiot. And you know what? That birth certificate we showed you, we lost that. And you're 17 now. And we go back to DC Comics and renegotiate this contract. And since that birth certificate was lost, they said Bob is 17, the contract is null and void, and now we negotiate a contract, and this is our lawyer. So this is why Bob Kane got a better deal. It's not that Bob was very smart, apparently he wasn't, but his parents were on the ball and said, no, we won't let this stand. So that's why we always had this byline, Bob Kane, even though Bob Kane didn't know what a brush was.
Wasn't his father an attorney?
I'm not sure if his father was actually an attorney, but at least they knew an attorney. Either his father was an attorney, you might know this better than I do, but of course they renegotiated that deal.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they renegotiated the deal just for Bob Kane, not for Bill Finger.
Indeed. Because Bill Finger was also, interestingly enough, a few years older than Bob, but he didn't have the same representation. Mm-hmm. And so once again, representation, get a lawyer before you sign anything.
Yep.
And another thing here, we have Robin coming in, which will be important later when we talk about Spider-Man, because Robin was, I'm not sure if he was the first sidekick superhero character, but he certainly helped taking the strip into a new direction and opening it up for younger readers. Because we all know this, Batman no longer was the brooding loner, and Jerry Robinson his talent is all over this strip for a long time. He created the Joker, he created Catwoman, and Jerry Robinson is the man on the strip. Now let's get to Steve. I think it's a little bit more. Okay, and right from this very early pages, and this is Steve Ditko in the early 1950s. This is no Marvel. This is a small publisher, even before he went to Charlton Comics. This is a small publisher now defunct. This is all in public domain. You can all go to the Digital Comics Museum, look for these strips. They're all available. These were all these crude horror and science fiction comics that rode on the curtails of EC Comics in the early 50s. Because EC Comics, as we all know, in 50-51, they came out not as the first horror comic book, but they really had the best talent, and they really made horror big. And you had all these horror comics. This is from a romance comic. Kirby and Simon invented that. So we were getting romance comics, we're getting horror comics, science fiction comics, still getting some Western tales, but horror, science fiction, the romance comics, they were selling big. There were no superheroes. Superheroes were forgotten. And this is a very, very young Steve Ditko here. And you can already see a little bit of his talent here. Because if you look at this panel layout, I mean, he's most famously known for the 9-panel grid. But what you will see in these samples is he was experimenting with the page layout. Other artists did this too, but the art and the layout already are very, very unique in my book.
Yeah. I'm just curious because we talk about Steve Ditko and the trademark getting coming up. I don't see anybody fighting to get these 50 Steve Ditko. It's all about the money. If it wasn't if it wasn't a Doctor Strange movie coming out, would anybody even care? I mean, fair enough, Spider-Man. But
I mean,
a lot of these stories, like that first Steve Ditko page you saw, that's from a story called Stretching Things. That's actually in public domain. Anybody can.
Yeah, these are all in public domain. If you don't know about the Digital Comics Museum, that's a project that's online. Go to the Digital Comics Museum, Google it. And these guys, these wonderful guys, they look for these in public domain comic books. They keep putting these up, and in this quality. I mean, this is actually from the Steve Ditko archives, but it's in the same quality. And you see, you can read all these stories in the old comic books. all in public domain. Nobody's fighting over those rights.
My comment, I guess, was a little bit facetious, admittedly, but it all boils down to money. Absolutely. If there wasn't, other than us and comic book fans, you walk down there, and before there was the Marvel movie, I suppose. If you go back 5 years and walk down the high street of anywhere and say, "Oh, if you heard of Doctor Strange?" and everyone go, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about." But thanks to the movie, that's what causes all this.
Exactly.
So it's not as altruistic as it sounds that the estate of Steve Ditko is going after big bad Marvel, because really what we're saying is the kids of Steve Ditko want the share of something of which they have actually not done anything with. It's actually the dads or the grandfathers or whatever. They're the guy. Steve Ditko's the guy that created it. So therefore, what right does the son of the uncle of the nephew of whomever?
Oh, yeah, but hang on. Hang on a second. There's something important to note here.
There's two. Well, actually, there's two things that I wanted to unpack.
Yeah. Let me get into the copyright situation first. It's not like the era of Steve Ditko one day woke up and said, "Now let's do Marvel." The copyright law in the United States was changed in the 70s to prefer or to favor creators. So every material that is not contested will revert back to the original creator after 50 years. So this is what's happening now. And Marvel now has sued to retain the copyrights. They say, no. They have been using these copyrights for many years. They are ours, and they were originally worked for hire. Dave?
Well, in that instance, I think the copyright law was changed, but it was a give and take. When that was changed, it was, yes, they extended the copyright period to help companies like Disney, but at the same time, they wanted to be seen to be even-handed, to give something to actual creators themselves. So that's why they did that. They wouldn't do that today, but that's what they did. What I was going to talk about was the public domain stories of Steve Ditko have all been collected, and I think IDW have probably done more of them than anybody else. Now, I know the way Steve Ditko is. If you do a book of his work and then offer him a royalty on it after the fact, he won't accept it. He'll just go, no, that's done. That's none of my copyright. You go and do what you want to do. I'm not going to promote this on your behalf, but you go. If you approach him, if you had approached him beforehand and asked his permission, there's probably a much bigger chance that he would probably go, "Oh yeah, that'd be really nice, thank you, and I wouldn't mind a copy." But I don't know if that's the way IDW went, but I'm pretty sure. With a lot of their material, like a lot of publishers do, if they can publish something for nothing, they will.
Yeah. They paid their editor for editing this, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. Now, also, I mean, what I'll say as far as his heirs receiving anything for it, we are in an industry where creators have always been incredibly poorly compensated for the work. I mean, yes, Chris gave the example of Simon & Schuster. They were paid a fine page rate at the time, but on the whole, creators have never been well paid. There's no pensions, there's no healthcare, there's no Medicare, stuff like that. And I think when as like any parent, when you if you have the money, you invest in a house and you pass that on to your heirs. I personally, I think Steve Ditko would not have tried to get his copyright back. I doubt that very much, because that's not the way his mind works. His mind work has always been, I made a bad mistake. That's my fault. But I signed it. I knew what I was doing. Off we go. Which is why he never went back. And even when he was working at Marvel, he even given the opportunity to do Spider-Man again, wouldn't.
But I think we have to separate. He contested Stan claimed credit for having created Spider-Man. He contested that because he said, no. Everything came from me. We'll talk about that later. But he never went to them for money. Dave is absolutely on the money. He's absolutely right here.
What I do know, all I can tell you is I do know, and having personally spoken to Jack Kirby and Roz Kirby, I do know that from their point of view, and however the recollections were, because I got to know them quite well in the 1980s, and obviously that was still a long way after Marvel. But from their recollections, what they were promised in building Marvel wasn't what they received. And that changed once they actually, the more success, it's literally like the more success that Marvel had, the more that Jack Kirby was sort of kind of pushed to the side. It was even to the point, if you can, his page rate was dropped at one point, and you can see it in effect when he decided that once his page rate was dropped, he'd just put less panels on the page. And so I think it's around sort of the late 60s, you can see him go from 6-7 panels a page down to 3 or 4. And he was actually...
It's also interesting to note, I mean, we're talking about this already here, while you look at this gorgeous art by Steve Ditko here, is that when you look at the role of Stan Lee, because when Martin Goodman sold the company to Perfect Film and in the late 60s, it was Stan who was fairly pissed because he didn't get any money out of the deal, because he thought, oh, they owe me because I created all these characters. That was Stan's thinking at the time. And when the company was sold again later in Tomori Eckerman, it was basically it was when they were sold to Ron Perlman. Perlman's people came to Stan Lee and said, well, basically, we don't need you anymore. We have all these characters. And Stan said, oh, no, wait a second. People know me, and I would make a big stink if you fire me. And I might contest the ownership of these characters. It was Stan, ironically enough, who leveraged the characters, so they gave him a huge contract. So all this contract Stan got, and they gave him the rights to the movies, 50%, la-di-da-di-da, which was later contested in court as well. But it was Stan who leveraged all these characters by claiming he created all these characters. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that ironic? Wonderful cover by Ditko here.
Oh, it is, isn't it? But no, I mean, again, that instance where, and because Stan got that deal, part of that deal meant he had to take credit for the work. So you saw lots of books where it would just be Stan Lee presents the Fantastic Four, Stan Lee presents this. So
yes, indeed. This is also, I mean, we're still outside the comic code here. This is very early, and this is really Kirby unleashed. I mean, Kirby could be very brutal in his artwork. I mean, that was the time. I don't think I've taken any pages from this story, but go out and find it. It is very nasty and very brutal.
It's number 12. I wonder what the 13th issue is.
It's even worse. It's even worse. I mean, okay, this is from this. I think this is from this story, but there's some nasty stuff going on. This is also. I mean, I'm not sure who colored this, but this is also. I mean, quite nicely colored. It adds a lot to this.
Yeah,
I mean,
you could almost say that it's like Mary Severin or Stan Goldberg type coloring.
Oh, she looks like Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah. And you will see there's a character who looks a lot like On May. And look at this guy in the middle panel. That's Peter Parker. That's Peter Parker, isn't it?
And the guy next to him almost looks like a young Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see all these characters here. There's also an elderly lady later who looks a lot like Aunt May. I mean, everything had to come from somewhere. And Ditko was reusing these characters he already created.
Yes, number 13. Perfect.
Yeah, here you go. Isn't that wonderful? And you see the madness in Ditko's mind. I mean, this is what he would also. You see early Doctor Strange here also.
I was just thinking that.
And he's experimenting here with the black and white, and I mean, this is really. These are really. If you go out there and if you go to a library, I don't know, don't stretch your funds. There's 6 volumes of Kirby art called the Ditko Archives.
Is that Mephisto in the top left? There you go.
Here you go. That was the Batman said, look, Green Goblin.
So here's a question then: did Ditko ever work for EC or any of those?
No. He never worked for. He never worked for EC Comics. EC Comics was a very tight club, and I don't know. He never darkened that door. I don't know why. I mean, if you look at this can go. I mean, the only Marvel artist or later Marvel artist who tried for EC was George Russos, and they kicked him out after one trial story. He said, "No, you're not good enough for us." John Severin later went to Marvel, but he worked first for EC Comics, and Mary Severin, of course, too. And Hollywood, I mean, and Joe Orlando, of course. But they worked first for EC Comics, I mean. And EC Comics was top dog at that time. But this is amazing stuff here. I mean, this is great stuff. I mean, this is very early Ditko.
No, his rocket took off.
So you can see a little bit of Ross Manning in this, can't you? You know how Ross did like his Flash Gordon stuff, and then obviously his later Star Wars stuff that wasn't the canon, like the comic book stuff. So it's interesting to see someone like Ross Manning get his sort of like inspiration from Ditko. And this young lady lavishing around there, that screams like Buck Rogers.
Totally.
Look at this. I mean, this the last panel. I mean, this is very well done.
You forget, you forget how solid an artist Ditko was, because you're so used to seeing him being kooky in Spider-Man, being all elbows and knees. But when it comes to like drawing like proper strong figures with good clean lines, you forget that he was an absolute master at that as well.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see the artwork in here that it's enticing. It really kind of gives that, hey, this is an adventure feel to it. It really brings you in.
Absolutely. And it has this very clean, attractive look to it. What we just wanted to see: attractive people going on an adventure.
I think when you go back to this period of Ditko, if you go back to a similar period in Joe Kubert's work, I always find the two very similar at this point. Their very early work was literally like very similar to one another.
And this is exactly, that's why I picked him. Look at the hairdo. But also, if you go back to can you go back to the page before? Look at no, not the next one.
That one?
No, the one with the title page. The next one.
There you go. Sorry.
Look at this. How this is laid out. This is also very Eisner, isn't it? This is very indicative of later work of Bill Eisner. I mean, this is also. I mean, this is very clean, and this is very, very attractive and very unusual also.
That looks like Alfred next to Norman Osborn in that little panel on the side. So it's a crossover.
Yeah, it's a crossover.
Just like this podcast.
The secret EC podcast, the secret EC podcast, not the secret EC crossover, because Alfred E. Newman is EC Comics. A lot of people don't know that. Mad Magazine was also EC Comics. Yeah, that's Norman Osborn here, chairman of the board. And this is already, I think, what we can also see here. He's the greedy capitalist. We see Ayn Rand's inspiration seeping in here as well. I mean, when you talk about Ditko, you have to talk about Ayn Rand. I mean, this goes hand in hand. This idea of objectivism, the artist is king, and the artist should never compromise his vision. And the thing is only one thing and never the other thing. There is no gray and white. There's no gray. There's only black and white.
There's Deborah Whitman on the top left, Johnny.
Woo, Deborah Whitman. Hashtag Spider-Man's true love.
Well, wait a minute now.
Oh yeah, we will later see a sexy Betty Brant like we've never seen her before. I mean, look at this. This is also very, very Doctor Strange.
I like the bleed out on the colors on the middle panel to the right, where it's just the grayscale, and all you see is the black of the mustache and the eyebrows. That's really
I'm also sure. I mean, it's almost heresy to say, but I'm also sure Jim Stranko looked at this and said, "Hold my beer." I mean, this is also very Stranko.
Well, I've said this on a number of podcasts. I think I said it on No Prize last week. If you give me a choice between Ditko and Kirby, I will always go Ditko. Always.
Wow, that's interesting.
So there you go. But hey ho.
No, I think that's a choice. That's a popular choice, and I think there's a comes down to the type of content as well. I think.
I look at that window from Dr. Yeah, I've got to say, when I was a kid growing up, I grew up on more Fantastic Four than Spider-Man. I think my very first Spider-Man was Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, which was a reprint in the UK for like a summer annual, and that was my first sort of like Ditko. Prior to that, I'd been Jack Kirby all along with the Fantastic Four, but Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1 just blew my mind. I was like, "Whoa, this is fantastic."
Well, I had a very strange. I mentioned this a couple of times. I had a very strange education because these Marvel 60 books with Ditko on Spider-Man, Kirby on the Fantastic Four, they were reprinted in Germany when I was 6 or 7 years old. So we bought them on the newsstand. We bought comics in the 70s, late 70s.
Likewise, exactly.
You see, that's how we grew up. And look at this. This is Peter Parker here all again. The body language. I mean, this is very Peter Parker.
See, I grew up on Steve Ditko's story first in the 60s, when there was all the rights had been sold, or secondary rights had been sold to a lot of Marvel, Charlton stories to British publishers who would publish monthlies that were all black and white, printed on newsprint.
Yeah. Look at how Doctor Strange this is.
Yeah.
And this is we are still in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me that the red and white page that was a couple of pages previously actually reminded more of when you mentioned Jim Steranko earlier.
There was very Steranko.
Yeah, there was that classic Jim Steranko cover he did for the first issue of Tower of Shadows that was rejected.
Yes.
Looks very much in that vein.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. It looked very Steranko. I mean, just the amount of storytelling. I mean, he had. If you pick up these The Thing and all these cheap horror comics that came out in the wake of on May, by the way. And we're still talking 1950s, and now tell me Steve Ditko didn't create on May. I mean, but look how expressive he is. But what I was about to say is, if you look at the art in those comic books, The Thing and stuff like that, Ditko's art stands out. I mean, he's experimenting. He makes every page interesting.
I think it's funny that the further you go back in time, the older Aunt May looks.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Hey!
And we have achieved something here. I mean, and now we're talking about this guy here, Spider-Man.
Are we going to sing the song?
Sing the song. How's it go?
Yes, how does it go? I can't seem to remember.
Really?
Well, go on YouTube and look for the orchestra version. I mean, that's a great one.
Maybe after this pod, though. Yeah, don't do it now.
Don't do it now. No. Stay with us a little bit. Hey, we're talking about Spider-Man, kids. Okay, so now I think he's quite popular. We know him, Spider-Man. But look at how unusual this is. I mean, we cannot talk about how big Marvel was in its early days. I mean, they didn't register the sales chart early on, but how unusual this is. There's a kid who looks like the readers, most likely, and he gains superpowers, and he's still a teenager, and he still has problems. I mean, you can argue how much influence by Stan Lee is in this, but this is also a lot Ditko in here. The outsider, the guy who can't get a break. The newspapers are out there to hunt him down, to call him a menace. This is right out of Ayn Rand. The creative genius hunted by the media. I mean, this is Ayn Rand. And also, I think the line at the end, this is very Stan Lee, this is the melodrama. I think Stan went deeply into melodrama. Versus for Ditko, this was a real life story. This was no melodrama. This was what he saw in his neighborhood. This was what he saw in his own life. I mean, I said it the other day on Twitter. Do we know anything about Ditko's love life? Do we know anything about his private life? Steve Ditko was fiercely private. And for all I know, he was a lonely guy all his life. I mean, that's Peter Parker.
Interesting points.
Oh yeah. Well, he's got a son.
And interestingly enough, look
So
at
he
this.
must have had some sort of love life, because he's got a whole bunch of people who want his copyright. So
do we know he's using, do we know this for a fact? But also
the DNA proof.
But also, I didn't want to go into that territory. But look at how sexy Betty Brant is here all of a sudden, with the curly hair and all that stuff and high heels. And somehow somebody told Steve to tone it down, because Betty became very boring looking an issue later. Here she's very, she's very, very film noir here. It's a very film noir story.
Wow. Poor Peter, never getting the girl.
Yeah, exactly. Because her brother died, and Spidey couldn't save him, and now she hates Spidey. I mean, is this Stan Lee? Is this Steve Ditko? I don't know.
Well, it's kind of, you asked that question. I'm going to go, not for the sake of the argument, I suppose, but I'm probably going to lean on Stan Lee, because he doesn't use the same trick with Captain Stacy, which is why Gwen hates Spider-Man for a while.
Exactly. I mean,
so I don't know. I don't know if that's
Stan
Lee using the same idea, or if it's Stan Lee using Steve Ditko's original idea.
But I mean, it also says a lot about Stan reusing ideas. I mean, this is also Stan.
Well, I think every creator does. I mean, we've talked about Jack Kirby at length, and Jack Kirby has used, he created Planet of the Apes before Planet of the Apes. So when he did Commandy, everyone said he was ripping off Planet of the Apes, but he was actually, he's just building on a story that he'd done 10 years before Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, could argue that the Fourth World stuff he did for DC is the same as the Eternal stuff he did for Marvel. You could
also argue that it's basically built on Thor, and Thor is something Kirby created in the 50s. I mean, he created this character.
This Thor thing, I've read a few books, the Marvel story predict mainly, and I don't get how anybody can turn around and say they created Thor when Thor's been a Norse god forever.
Yeah, but but that's absolutely true. But Kirby created a story that was very similar to the Marvel Thor in the 1950s for DC, where you had a normal guy booking a vacation in the North, in Sweden or whatever, coming across Thor's hammer. It's all in the Kirby's original story for DC in the 50s. Cool. And I'm very sure that when Stan said, "Okay, I need to come up with a new superhero," foolishly enough, Jack said, "Oh, I've got this character I did for DC a few years back. Look at this, Stan." And Stan said, "Oh, great! I give him a name, Thor. I created this guy." Yeah, here you go.
And again, if you look at the Marvel method, just because, in this instance here, Steve Ditko probably plotted and drew this story. However, Stan comes along and goes, let me just script this now.
Exactly.
And he would change things. He famously did that to Jack Kirby several times, where the pencils would arrive. He didn't like the way the story was laid out, so he got the inker to change the expressions on the faces, so that it was went from sad to smiling or smiling to sad, and changed the dialogue to reflect the way he wanted to go with it.
I mean, that's what I posted on Twitter the other day. I mean, and thanks for liking my tweet. It got really popular because Ditko created a 15-issue story arc for Doctor Strange early on, which influenced everything from the Matrix to a lot of things. And in the middle of that run, interestingly enough, you can look it up, Stan said, "Okay, I will say this was plotted by Steve Ditko." Because, I mean, you cannot be Stan Lee and look at this and say, okay, this is a story that's laid out for 15 issues. I mean, half issues because it was in Strange Tales. But it's a continued story with different story beats, very interesting, very, very compelling, one of the best Strange stories ever. And then be Stan Lee and say, oh, no, I created this. No. Eventually, he said, okay, it's plotted by Steve Ditko. And some make the case that Stan was so gracious with this plotted by credit because he was getting out of writing. Because also during the middle of the run, but he still claimed he wrote this or scripted this while Ditko plotted this, you see Roy Thomas' name pop up because Stan was moving out and say, oh no, we use Roy's credit now. Versus, I think everything came from Steve. On that particular story, in any case. Okay, this is also, I mean, this is from the landmark issue number 30, which is also I think this is 31. Actually, it is when Peter goes to college, and the first thing that happens, Aunt May falls ill, and he is worried about Aunt May, and the only means to rescue her is something Doc Ock has stolen, and he enters college, meets Gwen Stacy here. This is Gwen Stacy, by the way.
Just take a breath. Just let 13th Crusader enjoy this panel, because if we don't let him look at it, he'll go no.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, here we go.
At least 13 seconds.
Yeah, Gwen looks very hot here.
Yeah, indeed she does. Very movie
panel
star.
is classic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very movie star. I mean, and this goes to people saying, "Oh, Steve Ditko didn't know how to draw women." Are you insane?
Yeah, they hadn't seen his other work.
Yeah,
you can tell that when he was drawing her, he just took a little bit extra time than he did with anybody else.
And look in the middle panel in the second tier how her hair falls. That's very Veronica Lake. I mean, this is very, very, very stylish. And of course, Peter becomes the outcast of his college class as well, or college peers, because he's lost in thought. He's worried about Aunt May.
Look at that foreshadowing with Harry Osborn on the bottom being green.
Brilliant. And going here to Doctor Strange. I mean, one last word on Spider-Man. Apparently, this was one point of contention between Stan and Steve, because Steve wanted to keep Spidey in college. He said, no, in high school. He said, no, he's a kid. He should be a kid. He should stay in high school. And Stan, no, we make him older. He moves on. It's quite interesting to ponder where the strip would have gone. And oddly enough, this is the choice also Brian Michael Bendis took when he created his version of Peter Parker. He stayed in high school. Miles Morales stays in high school. In the Marvel movies, he's a high school kid. But Stan was, no, he needs to go to college. He needs to get older. And he basically, as Dave often commented, Stan and John Romita turned the strip into Betty and Veronica with Spider-Man.
Yeah. I think if you look at some of the early issues, you can tell the impact that I think even Steve Ditko wasn't ignorant of the appeal that the Archie comics had, but he brought his own aesthetic to that. Like you could almost, I mean, I just imagine at the time if Steve Ditko had ended up drawing Betty and Veronica.
Yes.
Imagine like Gwen Stacy, Betty looking like Mary Jane Watson and Veronica looking like Gwen Stacy.
We also see a little bit in here, and I think this goes back to Ayn Rand. It's a little bit of a class struggle here, because it's Gwen, who comes from a very affluent background, and there's Harry, who drives a sports car, and Flash Thompson is always the big man on campus, and there's Peter, who's clearly a working class hero, and he is the outsider because he also comes from. He has to work to be this good. He has to earn a scholarship. He doesn't get that money from his parents. It's quite interesting. It's very, very interesting subjects going on here in this book.
Very good.
Let's go to the Doctor then.
Did anyone notice that this version of Doctor Strange made an appearance or reappearance in the Marvel Universe this week?
No, the Asian Doctor Strange.
This Doctor Strange appears in the first issue of the current Death of Doctor Strange, written by Jenny Kay and art by
Interesting. I didn't know that. Since I do not follow current comics.
That is pretty strange.
I always loved the gloves with the Kirby crackle that Doctor Strange used to have.
I agree.
They're there in the new comic. Just it looks pretty much. It's exactly the same. It could be a lift. It's that well done.
Wow, it probably is a lift. But it's also. I mean, this is also. I mean, very.
Was it a blue cape?
Yeah. You know what? I'd have to double check on that. I'm sure it's a blue cape. I'm not.
Oh, cool.
Where is
His
it?
first cape was blue.
You know what? I'd look for it, but I have filed it. Wait, give me 2 seconds. I'll find out for you. Keep talking.
No
I'll do some research.
No problem. But look at this, how film noir this is and how claustrophobic this is, the small panels here. I mean, this is just, you can see really Steve fighting for this lower half of the page, who said, oh, we'll make a big splash page. No. Use the small panels to convey the idea of this guy is trapped. He's trapped in his own nightmares. And this is also the first appearance of Nightmare, the villain. Very, very cool. There's no origin story in this.
No, that would
And
come
later. I think the original idea was to make him Asian. He looks a bit Asian, doesn't he?
Yeah, Nightmare totally looks pretty. I don't know. It's got that very deep horror vibe there.
Very intense. And maybe you get to the origin story. Now we are with the 9-panel grids. I mean, this is a man trapped in his own world.
Give me 2 seconds. Let me just stop the screen a second. Right, here you go. That's the panel.
Oh, wow. Here we go. It's the blue cape. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's the original Doctor Strange. Very cool.
There you go.
There you go.
I like it.
Excellent. Very
Cool.
cool.
I'll go back. I'll go back to the PowerPoint now. Then.
That's cool. Very, very professional here.
Yeah. What can I say? Have means. That's it. That's kind of how that works. Yes.
That panel is pretty magical.
I tell you what, you are killing me. I have to. It's all right for you guys, but I have to put up with this all the time. It's like, this is a one-stop shop for you. This is like,
look at this. I mean, this is gorgeous.
I love those Nightmare panels. They really.
Yeah. I love that. The second appearance of Nightmare, and I think this is one of my favorite Doctor Strange stories. I mean, he really expanded on this creature Nightmare, and look at the lower tier, the first panel on the lower tier. This is really nothing looked like this in a comic book.
Yeah. I love that fourth panel because it looks like you're looking through Spider-Man's eyes, like it's.
Yeah.
I like the bottom right panel because it looks like the Green Lantern cars there.
Yeah, indeed.
And the cop who was chasing after the burglar in Amazing Fantasy.
Yeah. Hold up in some warehouse somewhere.
And this is the multi-part story I was talking about. I mean, and also this is the storyline in which Doctor Strange gets very interesting bondage gear put on him. And as a little history lesson,
where's that page?
Go to the next page. Another one. There you see. Hang on, you were too fast. There you see it. I mean, he has a mouse guard, and he's in chains. And I mean, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Steve Ditko and Eric Stanton, the bondage artists, share the studio, and there is some claim that Ditko also inked Eric Stanton's bondage art. I mean, there's an influence there, but there's some claim that Eric Stanton had a hand in creating Spider-Man. And Eric Stanton's daughter to this day claims that her father suggested the web shooter for Spider-Man. Interesting, isn't it?
I will say that one of my favorite female Marvel characters, I always say the name wrong, so apologies, is Ditko's, is it Claire?
Yeah.
Claire. I think she is absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
You can keep your Gwen, you can keep your MJ. Give me some Clear.
And we're talking about Steve Ditko here, but there's in my book no artist who ever drew a sexier Clear than Gene Colan, especially with Palmer on inks. I mean, if you go to the wonderful Roy Thomas, Gene Colan, Tom Palmer run, I mean, gorgeous artwork. I love this one.
But I think as well, I don't think Clear was probably the one of the earliest, best examples of a fully fleshed out female character. Complex, and particularly, like I think you pointed out as well online, Chris, like when it came to drawing her face, like again, there wasn't like a static, it was, it was conflicted. There was the full range of emotions. You compare it even with like Sue Storm. Sue Storm's range of expression was very limited. Clear, on the other hand, extremely, very emotive. Would flick back and forth. She'd be scared, she'd be frightened, she'd be strong, she'd be brave, angry, fearful. It was great.
And it's also, I mean, we're still talking Ditko here, but we have to go there. I mean, when Roy Thomas got hold of her he was the first decent writer after Steve Ditko, who worked on Doctor Strange. I mean, he created a very interesting dynamic. I mean, Doctor Strange got hip all of a sudden. He was the older guy going out with this young girl he had rescued from a strange dimension. Clea was very much the hippie girl who ran into a college professor and changed his life. And he set her up with a swank apartment. Oh, you can't live in my house. I rent an apartment for you. And she was very much, oh, I have these powers. And he, no, don't show your powers. No. I mean, this is very interesting. I love this one. We should talk about the Roy Thomas sooner or later on this show.
Yeah. Very complex character, and his contributions, though, to Marvel.
And DC.
Yeah, no, very much so.
Don't forget, it's just the society stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, but I think what I was going to talk more about was under Roy Thomas, it was the expansion that Marvel made in the 1970s beyond just taking Conan and the black and white magazine line, which he was always a strong advocate for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Star Wars. You've got to
Star Wars, Doc Savage,
Star Wars saved
Conan,
Marvel in the 70s.
Yeah. Plus, he also let a lot of young creators into the room when he was the editor-in-chief of the Stand. All these guys like Marv Wolfman coming in, and Don McGregor, Steve Gerber, all these guys, they all came in under Roy.
You know, when I look at Ditko, I've looked through your PowerPoint. I'm very disappointed that there's no Machine Man in this.
Oh right, yeah, definitely.
Because for me, that top panel there with this young lady in the purple, she reminds me so much of the bad guy from the Machine Man comics.
We could have really made this a full-on just about Steve Ditko, not about the court case or anything. We could have covered like even I really like he didn't do much of it, but I like Steve Ditko's. He did I think it was a 3 or 4 part Demon story as a backup in one of the titles. I thought that was very nice. His Etrigan was very, very Steve Ditko, but I thought it was very cool. He did an issue of Man Bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was his one-time drawing that I believe it's the one and only time he drew Batman. And that's, I think it was first issue special, or it might have been the first issue of the Man Bat comic. I think I ran about 3 or 4 issues, but the Steve Ditko issue, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful work. He, and Rom. I mean, geez, you could do his work on Rom, inked by. Craig Russell on Steve Ditko. Who would have thought that team would be so good?
It's surprising when you start delving a little bit deeper than just Spider-Man.
Right. Yeah, Micronauts.
Right.
He did the Captain Universe character, if I'm not mistaken.
The Question.
Yeah, absolutely.
All these characters have just kind of.
Well, I do. Well, if we go through here, I do touch on very briefly, unfortunately. But
let's go. Let's go to Dave's picks here.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, we talked about Spider-Man, and this is the cover where it's it's penciled by Jack Kirby.
See, I said this last week. I said, where was that? Was it on Old Timers? It was on Old Timers, and I'd said to Professor, that is not a Ditko cover.
No, it's Kirby.
It isn't.
Oh, it's absolutely Kirby. It's you can tell from the you can tell from the buildings in the background. You can tell
you can see the face of the guy.
The poses, even the poses of the little guys standing on the rooftops, like they're all Kirby poses.
In fact, isn't that Mr. Fantastic in the blue jacket?
So, Spidey, what's going on here?
Now, I remember reading one story that Jack Kirby got to pencil that first cover because it was an acknowledgement of his contributions to Spider-Man. he was the one who came up with the character name Spider-Man. He was the one that pitched Spider-Man. But the thing was, it just looked like every other hero. It was an older character. It wasn't a young character. He had the same sort of boots and costume. It was kind of like if you put him next to Captain America, there probably wouldn't be much, overall difference in stature. And so I think, it's one of those things where Stan made a good call and said, well, I love the idea. I love the name. But went to Steve Ditko finally for the final version. So this is what I mean. It's like Spider-Man has a concept. Would it have, even if Stan hadn't pitched Spider-Man, would we have ever had Spider-Man? Would it have been a team with a different name? But anyway, so Jack penciled the first cover, and when he gets his own comic, again, we've got Spider-Man with Jack Kirby's other creations on it, Fantastic Four. But if you look at those like that, stuff like that webbing underneath the arms, that's all Ditko. Like the costume is all Ditko. Like this is, Jack Kirby, amazing. I worship at his feet every day, every morning. But Jack couldn't have come up with Spider-Man, not this Spider-Man. I think it plays to the differences in who Steve and Jack were. And I think that's what made their contributions to the Marvel Universe so powerful, in that Jack went big. He was the gods. He was like the big scientist. And Steve Ditko was, I'm going to deal with the average kid and the underbelly of the darkness. I'm going to go into the corners, the dark corners of the Marvel Universe. And I think that's why the Marvel movies are as successful as they are, because they're going to both playing to Stan and Steve's strength, Jack and Steve's strengths.
Very good argument. Very good point.
Yeah. But again, it's like I'm including these pages because, again, you look at Dr. Octopus, you look at Green Goblin, and as I hate to say this, I just cannot see Stan Lee creating these characters. I just can't. They are so, like, particularly the way they're drawn, the appearance. I just don't see it. I just don't see Stan. Stan had 20 years before this to create something.
There's also this wonderful argument to be had that Steve and Jack came to DC. We talked about the early years of Steve coming before Marvel. I mean, famously, when Marvel lost their distribution, they were distributing their books themselves under Atlas. Atlas was basically their distributor. And then when the comic boom died down in the late 50s, Martin Goodman shut his own distribution shingle down and went with another distributor, and that didn't work out because the distributor closed its doors after a year, and then they had to go to DC Comics to get distribution. Marvel was distributed by DC Comics, basically, by Independent News, the sister company of DC Comics, and they were limited in their output. That's why we only had eight books. And at that time, Stan had his artists. The artists Stan worked with were not Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. They were Joe Manili and Matt Baker.
Yeah,
the famous Matt Baker. But Matt Baker died of a heart attack, and Joe Manili died in a train accident. And so Stan was looking for two new artists to work with, and those were Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. That was shortly before the Marvel Universe was created.
Well, Steve and Jack were always there anyway. If you look at all the big monster stories leading up to the birth of the Marvel Universe. Jack had left Marvel and he was working at DC, and he was fired at DC when he got into a lawsuit over copyright, ironically enough. And that was when he came back to Marvel. And that was after Joe Manili had died. So Jack said, "Oh, I need an artist. You come on board." And that's when they did the monster stories. That was the time when Jack came back. There's also guys like Bob Powell who did quite a bit of work as well.
But Stan had to fire these people when they lost the distribution deal.
Yeah.
And we see Aunt May here again, looking very Steve Ditko-y.
Oh, obviously. Clearly. Shall I tell you who drew this page, Chris?
I'm not sure. Is that Jack Kirby? Is that Jack Kirby trying to draw the Steve Ditko style and failing at it?
Kirby drew the box.
Yeah.
But you just drew the box, that's all.
I can't believe back in the 60s there was still 9-panel pages. Oh my God.
No, that's.
I thought the Watchmen created that.
No, it's very Ditko. It's very Ditko. And I was just about to say that this is very claustrophobic. I mean, everything feels boxed in, everything feels small. They live in this small house in where do they live? In
Queens for ourselves.
In Queens.
That's exactly how it is in New York City, and I can vouch for that. Trust me.
Yeah, I trust you. I've been to New York.
But remember the title panel grid was also very effective in that, most of the stories back then were all done in one. So you had to fit the entire story into sometimes 8, 10, 11 pages. First couple of issues was 2 stories in each issue. So, which kind of lends credence that they might have actually been changed the thought. Like, look at Fantastic Four #1. The possibility that the first issue might have actually been spread across 2 issues of Tales of Suspense, even, or two stories in one. Yeah,
I like this panel how they do the brag at the bottom, written by Stan Lee, author of the Fantastic Four, illustrated by Steve Ditko, illustrator of Doctor Strange, lettered by Sam Rosen, letterer of Patsy Walker.
But what Stan. This is when people talk about Stan and Jack and Steve, etc., blah blah blah, go back and forth. This is the type of thing that I thought. This is what Stan really brought to Marvel. It was a little wink, a little nod. His bullpen pages was again it made you think that you were part of it. Yeah. Like it was a little joke, a little jibe. It was like ha ha ha. We're not taking ourselves 100% seriously here. And I think that's what made him so enamored of people. Like this is what everyone loves Stan.
I think also the idea of positioning Marvel as the outsider. I mean, this the underdog. I mean, that was really, kids could identify with that. They were not the popular guys. They were not DC Comics. They were the strange guys. They were the kids sitting in the back of the class. I mean, and that made Marvel really popular. Stan was a very brilliant marketer. You have to give that to Stan.
Oh yeah, I mean, and again, if you go on YouTube and do some searches of for Stan Lee and some of the videos that have been posted, you can see how during the 60s, Stan totally reinvented himself. He started wearing a wig. He was, the glasses, the open shirt. But before that, he was very sort of like tie, very smart. He was balding.
He looked like an insurance salesman, and then he became hip.
Yeah, well, that hip. I mean, it kind of personally reminded me of like that guy that was like, going up to some waitress, going like, "Hey, girl, do you want to be in movies?" And and the following day, she's like, well, she's not quite in the movie that she probably anticipated.
Do you want an actress role? It's on The Simpsons.
Are you a true believer?
Yeah.
Class. So here's a quick question for you then, just a little bit out of left field, just to kind of get a bit of a reaction from everyone. Why are so many Spider-Man's villains all animal related? And why is only Mysterio the one that isn't?
Well, scorpions are natural predators of spiders. So there's one.
Exactly.
All right, okay, great. Okay, so what about chameleons?
I think that they were so...
Same.
I think it was just that when you look at the shorthand of comics, if you have someone called the Beetle or the Scorpion or Dr. Octopus, it immediately gives over a lot of the information about their potential. Someone like the Scorpion, we know it's got a sting in the tail, it's nasty, it's probably going to be a bad guy. Dr. Octopus, again, the same. It sounds quite sinister. And I think that's just comics for you. A little interesting aside. Back when Stan was struggling a little bit in the, I think it was like the late 90s, a friend of mine who lived in the same town as me in New York, he was working with an entertainment company and was trying to reach Stan Lee. And because I knew Stan Lee, I put him in touch. And they ended up giving him $1 million for an option on 3 characters. And what he did was Stan had already a list of characters that he'd created and gave it to him. And so he said, like, oh, do you mind, like, hey, do you fancy having a cup of coffee? And like, so I went over to his house, having a cup of coffee, and he showed me this list. And it was a list of every animal that so far hadn't been turned into a comic book with either man or woman before or after. And I was like, and I'm looking through this list and I'm going like, do you have any information on these characters? And he said, well, no, apparently. So if we pick 3 and Stan will give us some information about the characters once we've paid him. So basically he'll come up with an origin of those characters. And it was literally like about six sheets of paper. And it was just this.
So Stan was the original coin-operated boy.
Yeah. So when it's like, hey, like, if that's what I'm known for, why don't I just, he made bank off it. So, all power to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I saw this version of the beetle that you have up there, I thought it was a dung beetle, to be honest.
Yeah. that would have made the logo a bit too long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also. I mean, this is the amazing 3-parter we saw a few pages from earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the master planner, and this is what they used for the first Spider-Man movie, the new Spider-Man movie, Tom Holland movie.
Yeah.
Spider Slayer.
Yeah, the first Spider Slayer. Yeah.
Do you remember that in the animated cartoon, the Spider Slayer?
Yeah.
I used to crack up the way they animated that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's funny, like the Crime Master's up at the moment. And when you go back and look at some of these characters, you see the level of villain they fought at the very beginning, and how they just wouldn't be considered a threat anymore. They like, a guy with a mask and sort of a smoking gun. Like, how's he going to have anything to do?
It's like the Spidey TV show from the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, but there's also an argument to be had that most of Spider-Man's villain were all created by Steve Ditko. And if you go to the Meta run, the only original villain they came up with was the Stalker and Kingpin. Other than that, there are no new villains.
There's that wonderful panel again.
Well, we'll just skip past that, shall we?
Oh.
There you go, the chameleon.
Yeah.
That rope's got to go, friend.
Yeah. Oh, poor Aunt May. Oh, she's almost at death's door. Again, was this?
Yeah.
I know this is early on, but this must be at least the 50th time she's almost died by this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, definitely.
Loving these panels.
I tell you what,
Yeah,
Peter
so great.
Peter loves his pen. He's not giving it to anyone. Get lost, Gwen. It's my pen.
Who are you? Who are you, Archie? Get out of my face. Get out of my face. Get out of my face. I mean, but what a cover design. I mean, let's talk about how brilliant this cover design is. I mean,
it's not just this. It's not just this cover. I mean, it's like, this is literally, I think this is the issue before Steve Ditko left, and this book is. I've got some other pages. Here we go. Look at the build-up in.
Yeah,
we've got mixed up a little bit, but like, look, 7-panel grid goes to a 6-panel grid, goes to a 4-panel grid, goes to a splash page.
Yeah,
it's
amazing.
It's just one of the greatest sequences ever in comics. That issue
And you think about, you talk about influencers, but Dan Jurgens used exactly the same principle of panel when Superman was fighting Doomsday. If you remember back in the 90s, it was like as the fight got more visual, and the impact was so greater, you get less and less panels to the point where you get the point.
And I mean, what is so brilliant about this is, I mean, and Alan Moore said it. I mean, it's just you don't need the words by Stan Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of ruins it. Actually, you don't need to read the words. I mean, you see everything.
Yeah. These panels to me are very, very symbolic because it represents all of the struggles that if you followed Spider-Man through this point and how he was dealing with that. And it felt like, man, I just want to give up sometimes. But now, not only is this symbolic that he's going to have the willpower to overcome that, you're also getting a physical display of how strong Spider-Man really is. I don't think the readers to this point even understood how strong he really is.
But he's also
Neither did he. That's the whole purpose of this.
Yeah, exactly. But what's also interesting is he's not doing this just to survive. He's doing this because he blames himself for the death of Uncle Ben, and Aunt May is ill, and she's dependent on him. So he has to free himself for Aunt May.
Right.
It's I watched. Which one is it? Is it Homecoming? The first Tom Holland.
Yeah, it's Homecoming. Yeah.
So I watched. I watched that, and I absolutely hate the movie because Spider-Man should not have a talking suit. That's just the rules.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
And then, but you stick with it, and it gets to this scene where he's struggling under all the thing, and he shouts for help, and then he mans up, as it were, or spiders up, I suppose, and does it. And I'm sat watching this on the screen, and all I kept thinking about was Ditko, and thinking Ditko did it better. And that's no disrespect to Tom Holland or anything like that.
No.
Although Andrew Garfield is the better Spider-Man on screen. So that resonance, this whole panel, these panels where you get to this is quintessential. This is probably one of, prior to Gwen's death, probably one of the biggest scenes in Spider-Man up to that point.
Yeah, I posted this on Twitter. There was some young commenters saying, "Well, this is where the movie got it from." Yeah, this is where the movie got it from. I mean, if you're interested in Spider-Man, pick up some of these old issues. I mean, go back to the early issues and see how great they are. And you can still read your new Spider-Man books. They're still there. They're still available. But go back, pick up a Marvel Masterworks or an Omnibus, and actually own the Marvel Omnibus that collects all the Steve Ditko stories in one book. It's the biggest book I own. It's the biggest book I own.
Well, if you have that, as long as it includes the 2 annuals he did.
And it includes everything Ditko did. All the crossovers, everything.
Because in a way, it's like if you're going to, as far as Spider-Man's concerned, if you're a Spider-Man fan and you don't have that book, then it's kind of like you don't know Spider-Man. And you'll realize that everything comes from that.
Yeah, I love this page right here.
I'm sorry, I laughed when you were speaking. It wasn't that I disagree with what you're saying. I just saw this panel, and all I kept thinking was a man with 2 brains. Leaping lizards. Yeah, we have them as well.
Yeah.
Great movie. That's a great movie. That's a wonderful movie.
Does he go to get the same pair of pants where Dr. Banner gets his?
Yeah.
He gets his cast off.
Yeah. Which is interesting because purple is the villain color. That's interesting that Hulk wears the purple pants. That's interesting because purple is the villain color.
The terrible tinkerer. Oh my god.
Yeah, well, maybe not so great.
Yeah, it's Pierce Pete in this.
No. Yeah, that's a Kirby created character.
Yeah, but the Vulture's interesting. The Vulture's interesting because we have an old guy going up against the young guy. That's also quite fascinating.
This shot of Peter's classmates, again, this is an example of when people talk about creating something, I think of world building. And if you look at the world building that Steve Ditko did on his part of Spider-Man, like all of these characters, look at the variety of poses, the types of people they are, the body language of them all. This is what you call world building. So when you say who created Spider-Man, are you talking about just the character, or are you talking about the world that followed? And it's and going back to my earlier comment, if you own all the Steve Ditko Spider-Man issues, you have all the relevant information about Spider-Man.
Yeah, yeah.
I like how, and I totally agree with what you're saying there. I actually love how this panel, you can see just from the art, take away the dialogue, and you can see exactly who is who. You know, you've got Flash giving it the muscles, you've got everybody being in awe of him, you've got Bookworm Peter over there in the background. You know, you're absolutely right. This panel, this page, it doesn't need that. It just shows you exactly who. You know, there's a dude in the green shirt and the bad tie pointing at Peter like you shouldn't be.
It's like a fly in the wall view here.
Yeah, it shouldn't be picking on him with that shirt on. It's terrible.
Yes, he's saying, "Well, that is the nerd, not me. Look at him. He's
I might be wearing green, but he's wearing some sort of sweater vest. The nerd."
Exactly. Guy, look at this guy.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
I love this. Yeah, I love this panel.
Yeah.
And again, you like literally like that's it. Like everything you need. If you took away everything else that was created from Spider-Man since Steve Ditko left and just said this is all you have to work with, you're fine. Like,
I'm cool. Doesn't it look sad though? Doesn't it look sad in that picture?
Yeah.
The way his eyes are more horizontal than vertical.
I mean, I would be too if my aunt looked like Yoda, like she does in this panel.
Hard to see the spider web is.
Yeah.
No,
here we go.
Halloween's not around the corner yet. Easy.
Yeah. Whoa.
I wonder if this was the panel that when they approached Marissa Tomei, this is the character you're going to play. Are you okay with that?
We don't need much makeup.
Yeah.
Some strange tale stuff. Excellent. I think his Human Torch there is a little bit too Marvel formula, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And there's Pace Pop Pete for you.
Hey, girl,
Piss Pop Pete. So I included the cover because this is the first issue of Strange Tales that's Doctor Strange appeared in.
Right.
Exactly.
Not a mention of him on the cover. Because
not at all.
Because I don't think at the time they were actually. I don't think Stan was prepared for it to be a new strip or anything. It was
exactly.
Steve had brought this strip in, and it was like, okay.
Yep. And he admitted that Steve created Doctor Strange. He said, "Well, Steve created that one."
Yeah.
You know, again, these panels with Nightmare. I mean, they just speak.
It's
volumes.
amazing. It's just amazing.
I mean, I included the whole story here because I mean, again, it's only 5 pages, but it's like everything's in it, and again, it was, you know, when you talk about these days when. I think the comment I was going to make when you were talking about Dan Jurgens and Superman versus Doomsday was the story that Steve Ditko did was spread over 3 issues.
Yeah.
The story that Dan Jurgens did with Superman and Doomsday was spread over something like 30 issues and 8 titles.
Yeah, it was a crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you know, it's just like you see this all, and it's just like there's this juxtaposed with the Fantastic Four and Thor and everything else. It's just adds. This is what the type of thing that gave Marvel another dimension.
Even black and white, it looks great.
Yeah.
No, I love it. It's just it's probably even better. Actually, in black and white.
Yeah. I love Dormammu. I always love that character. I mean, this is gorgeous art.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well that I think the other title that we don't give enough credit to around this time was actually probably Sergeant Fury, because remember in the early 1960s, you know, I mean, I know from growing up in the UK in the 60s. Every single weekly comic had at least 1, if not 2 or 3 war stories in. and they were still very popular. Like our parents had fought in the war, our grandparents fought in the war, so they were very important. So I think it's like at that time, as far as giving, and again, giving the Marvel Universe another dimension. Yeah.
And I mean, talking about how valuable these characters are, I've just checked on my other laptop. Venom just opened to 90 million domestically. 90 million domestically in a pandemic. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that's Ditko Comics cover there is just, that gives you an example of, I mean, obviously not every character there he created, like obviously Superman and Batman are up there. And Mr. Fantastic, but the majority of characters there he did create, and it's just, you know, that's an amazing legacy. Yeah. You know,
it's also a testament to how versatile he is was as an artist.
And I think it's a shame as well that the Creeper didn't get a longer run under Ditko. It was such a weird, like, kooky character that I just thought was a lot of fun and just was a great little book. But again,
Hawk and Dove was also interesting.
Yeah, it was. But it just goes to show that like certain titles, DC has tried many times to resurrect the Creeper, and you can't. It's like it's a product of a certain creator at a certain time. And
I agree with that. It's definitely of its time.
Absolutely.
So, some of these characters, I mean, if you have a character that lasts more than 10 years, you're doing well. And fair enough, DC probably hit the gold mine with Bats and Superman, and Marvel did it fantastically, ironically, with Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. I mean, just look at the mutants, for example. X-Men got cancelled practically, turned into a reprint book. So not everything that Marvel did was fantastic, was selling as well. So you got to think. I mean, even I'd argue that Avengers didn't hit its stride till Cap turned up.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's also, I mean, the Hulk got cancelled after 6 issues. I mean, just imagine they never went back to the Hulk. I mean, that would have been a waste, but he was not successful.
Silver Surfer never managed to get past anything until the 80s, and people started buying it as part of the new into space idea with Infinity Gauntlet coming from out as well. So I agree that some characters they have a sell-by date that can only work in certain areas, and unfortunately the Creeper is one of them.
Yeah,
I mean, it's also an interesting. It's also interesting when we talk about who created what. If you look at the Silver Surfer, when Stan Lee wrote the Silver Surfer in this run with John Buscema, I mean, what he did, he turned the Silver Surfer inward. He was stuck on Earth, versus Kirby went all cosmic on everything. It's quite interesting. It also tells you a lot about who is maybe the better writer, or who's the guy with some more interesting ideas to see the potential of these characters.
Cool, excellent. There you go. You are all out of points.
Yeah, let's also return a little bit to the lawsuit. I mean, it's just I made once this story broke. I think it broke on a comic books website. I said, let's see how the mainstream media will run with it. And what the mainstream media ran with was not that the heirs of Ditko were suing Marvel, but they were running with the story that Marvel was suing to retain the rights. That was the big story. Until it was either Variety or the Hollywood Reporter wrote a legal piece and said, oh, wait a minute. We think there's a strong case that the Ditko estate will get the rights. And they argued, and they broke down the original lawsuit, and I hadn't completely missed the boat on that one. The reason why Marvel eventually settled with the Kirby estate was not because there was a lot of noise going on. They settled because the Supreme Court was willing to hear the case.
Yeah.
And Marvel got cold feet all of a sudden and said, oh, wait, what? No, we settled with those guys. And the Hollywood Reporter was right. They made the case that there's nobody saying that this will not go the same way, that the Supreme Court will not be open to the same thing here. And Marvel would be very well advised to settle this very quickly, because they really have a chance, Ditko Estate really has a chance to retain those rights. And it will make it very complicated, because this will only be the North American rights. not
Well,
the
I think-
international rights.
So I have a question about this, to be fair. Just 2 seconds. Clear my throat. Excuse me. Because I read this book, The Marvel Story by Sean Howe. It's, if you love the Marvel comics,
Excellent.
read
Super
this
book.
It's like this thick. but
Excellent.
it's
Oh, it's
super good.
amazing. It's very amazing.
It seems to me that every time copyright law is even mentioned, creators settle and then come back down the line to challenge again. If you read this book, Jack Kirby settles he settles on the Captain America stuff. He settles on other things. He must settle 3 or 4 times. So whilst I agree that creators have to have some right in what they create, if you sign an agreement that says, "Fine, this is what I'm going to take from you for this creation," where then do you get the chance to actually, after you've had your slice of pie, to give it back Oliver style? Please, sir, can I have some more? Because you know what, you've made a little bit more money off the characters that I created. Where's the line stop? Is my question.
From the way I understand it, it was these newer cases stem from a change in the copyright law, which worked retroactively. And this opened the doors for some of these creators to say, wait a minute, if this no longer is work for hire, and if the copyright reverts to me, then I have a grounds to sue. And this is also, at the end of the day, also the reason why these creators eventually settle is because we're talking billion-dollar companies. And I mean, they come with you with more motions, and you don't have the money. And you will eventually say, okay, you give me $100,000. Yeah, sure. I make this go away.
I think they're essentially rope-a-doping the creators, right? Because they have all the funding, they have all the lawyers, and they can drag this out. And as a creator, you're already in the game to try to sue them to get money, but it takes money to get money.
Yeah,
exactly.
Disney literally have a building filled with lawyers.
Yeah,
and all their job is to do is basically make sure that these days everyone has an ironclad contract. I've read contracts from Disney where if you read the first half of the contract, it sounds a very good, reasonable contract. And a lot of creators only read the first half, and it gets to the sort of like all the, the very wordy and all these very legal terms towards the back. But they're interested in, they get to the point where it's like, no, they've agreed to everything I want. Oh, this is great. Fantastic. However, if you get a lawyer to read the rest of it, you'll understand that what they've done is the moment you sign it, they can actually retroactively toss out everything they've given you at the front of the contract because you haven't gone all the way through the contract. And that's their job. Their job is to screw you over. It's basically literally to screw you.
I tell people, like, anytime that you get a contract thrown in front of you, right, for the comic folks out there, pretend that you're sitting across the table from Mephisto. Right? Are you still going to sign it? It has to be something incredibly good, or something that you're willing to give up.
But
that could cost you.
I mean, and just as a commentary on the legal system. I mean, I'm not throwing shade at America particularly, but to any legal system. I was listening to this True Life podcast the other day, and there was a guy had hired a hitman from a Latino background, and the hitman got sued in court. He went on a murder trial, and the guy who hired the hitman was a rich guy, and the DA basically told the press, "I'm not going to sue that guy. He has a lot of lawyers. He is very rich. We have the guy who pulled the trigger. We're not touching the rich guy." And that's the legal system. It's horrible, but if you can afford legal representation, here you go.
It's a dichotomy of issues here, right? Because you have a camp of people that are all for the creators, right? They know it's Steve Ditko. They want to see the Ditko estate win. They want to, make it sound like, hey, we're kicking it to Marvel. They screwed over the creators, whatever. But then there's the other camp of like, this is business. So Marvel naturally, they're like, well, we've seen what happened over with Schuster and Siegel, and now we're dealing with Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Let's get a head start on all the other stuff that fell in that era, where you have that gray line or gray area of the work for hire. How do you prove that? It's at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And to actually generate a court case both sides need some sort of evidence. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be, how do you interpret work for hire and how do you prove it?
Well, I think with Spider-Man, all that Steve Ditko can lay claim to is what the aspects of it he created, and at the end, even if he was successful, Marvel would still own the trademark and would still be able to carry on using it.
Yeah, and Marvel's not stupid either. I mean, when it comes to Spider-Man, you got Miles Morales running around. You've got how many Spider-Man do we have now within the multiverse?
Oh yeah,
they're not stupid. Like, to me, these are like insurance policies. In the event they cannot settle or lose the case if it keeps getting pursued.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we said earlier, like, Doctor Strange is a much better case for Steve Ditko because he created that completely and brought it to Marvel. He pitched it to Marvel. If you pitch something, if you're not commissioned to do it, if you pitch something, the chances of you retaining and regaining ownership of it and copyright on it is much greater. Again,
I think there should be some clarification too for the audience out there that, in the event Marvel loses this battle, it doesn't mean that Spider-Man goes away. It just means that they got to jump through more hoops to
they have to license him.
They have to on how they want to use him.
They have to pay royalties,
and exactly, and that's what it all boils down to, is the money.
Well, to be honest, let's be honest. It's the royalties that people care about.
Exactly.
Whoever owns the copyright for Spider-Man isn't going.
Isn't
going to make the comic book, is it? They're going to make it off his appearance in his movies, in the toys.
And still you had these idiotic tweets going around. I mean, Comics in the Golden Age pointed those out, and it's ridiculous. With thousands of likes of a guy who posted, "Oh, what will happen if the stupid Ditko estate got the rights? Oh, no more Marvel movies, blah blah blah. This will go away." Idiots. Nothing will go away. It's just about money.
No, it won't. And I think every single person, no matter what your point of view is, probably wouldn't be upset if the Ditko estate got to actually make some money.
Right. Exactly. At the end of the day, the families want the character to continue being used. They just want the money as well. They feel like they're entitled to it.
And to all these people who say, "Oh no, the Marvel universe will be affected, the cinematic universe," just imagine this: you created a character, you gave the character to Marvel. And they said, "Oh, here's $1,000 for the characters," and they're making billions of this character. How would you feel?
I would, if you're asking my honest opinion on this, if you're asking my genuine, honest opinion on this, I would feel a little bit annoyed because they're making more money. But by the same token, I'd have no recourse because you know what? I've signed. It's like turning around and taking the brunette to the dance when really you fancy the blonde. It's like, you went out, you made your choice. I've signed the contract. I've said, this is what I'm writing on. This is what I'm drawing. This is what you're giving for me or giving to me for it. That's it. What you do with it thereafter. But
it's interesting. But it's also interesting. I mean, it comes down to copyright law, and I'm not the expert on American copyright law and on copyright law in general. But can you actually sell something you created? Can you actually sell it, or is it always a licensing deal?
In certain countries, you can't actually sell the rights to what you
exactly.
You can't sell the rights to what you own. You can give permission to, and so you have no recourse. So that person then goes off and makes money as long as they pay you royalties on it.
Right.
I mean, there is that aspect as well. Is what would happen if we ran if American comics was run in the same way that, say, Japanese and European comics were produced, which is if the creator had the shared ownership with the publisher, so that the moment the creator said, like, "Hey, look, I've got to issue 100, I'm done now, I've finished, and I want it to end now," so the publisher has to then find something to replace it with. What because America is a much more capitalistic based country and companies own things and they want to keep milking them, it's, they don't see the difference between Spider-Man and a bag of peanut M&Ms. They really don't. It's
Dave, I got a question for you here. So there's also the perspective of up and coming creators, right?
Right.
What kind of messages this send? Like, man, like nowadays, you know that the contracts are much more structured. You definitely should get an attorney to go with you to look at these contracts before you sign it. But this is also, I would think, a pretty strong motivator for guys to just go indie flat out, because they're like, I don't want anybody to mess around with me, but I want to put my product out there.
But I think that's what you're seeing, and I think that's
Right.
why there's a certain. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I feel there's a certain stagnancy in comics at the moment, because what's happening is creators don't want to give their ideas to companies like Marvel and DC. They want to keep them for themselves. So they're busy writing and drawing X-Men, Spider-Man to build their name up, so they can leap off to Image or wherever and self-publish their own, create their own book.
And I think what.
Hold on a second, Chris. Sorry. I just wanted to finish that thought.
Go.
Obviously, one of the things that Marvel and DC can do is give your property a platform where eventually it could be a feature film like Watchmen.
Correct. Right.
However, you're going to have to relinquish control, a certain amount of control on that.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, these days, things like that can be negotiated, but it's a case of what do you want? If you want 100% complete control over your IP, but never and you don't mind if it never makes a film or TV show, you just want to keep making comics, that should be your choice. But if you make a deal, and you kind of have to live by it. If you sign a deal hoping that, hey, at some point these rights are going to return to me because they'll stop publishing it, you can't. You didn't negotiate that into your contract. You negotiated that as long as the book's in print, they can do with it what they like. I'm referencing Watchmen really here.
Exactly, that's what I thought you were talking about. Watchmen.
Right.
And I was also going to make a comment about Marvel Man as well, in that Marvel Man was created because the publisher went to a British creator to fulfill a demand that he had for reprints of Captain Marvel, which he no longer had access to, and asked that creator, give me something just like it so that no one pretty much notices the difference. And that's what he did. So basically, it's so he didn't create and pitch. The problem for Marvel is there is no document in existence on that transaction. They cannot prove, we know by word of mouth, even from Mick Anglo himself, that he was asked to do that. He said in interviews, I was asked to do that. But what does that mean now? Was it an orphaned IP, which sometimes happened? Is that an orphaned copyright? Should it be in public domain in that instance? But again, as long as you've got Disney around, they're going to squash anybody's attempts to do that.
Yeah, they have an armada of lawyers.
Exactly, they do. So, but again, even having an armada of lawyers, what are you waiting for? Why not? It was interesting that Marvel, having supposedly the ownership of Marvel Man again, chose not to turn back the character to Marvel Man as he was originally created, but just did it as Miracle Man as it was changed for the American audience.
Johnny, you need to block somebody in the chat.
Oh, let me have a quick look. Sorry. Block. There you go.
Thank you. Excellent. I think what we have these days is also, Dave and me, we talked about this. You have, for creators who really want to put their work out there, we have thankfully a lot of venues to do that. You have Kickstarter, you have Amazon, Kindle, you have Substack, you have a lot of venues. And my advice to any upcoming creator, build your own social platform. Build your own followers. Go on Twitter, go on Instagram, go on Facebook. Build your community and say, okay, I'm a creator, I have this coming out. Are you interested in this? Build a community, talk to your readers, talk to your upcoming readers, and build a relationship that is your work. Yeah. And then go on the Kindle, go on Kickstarter, and put your book out there.
Yeah.
Interesting how I see different people do this differently. So, for example, I absolutely love Ram V, who did a lot of work on Vault Comics a couple of years back. Now Ram V works for DC, and he's doing Justice League Dark. He's just about to leave Catwoman.
Swamp Thing.
A Swamp Thing. Yeah, absolutely right. And yet you've got other people doing it the other way, where they're doing things for DC or Marvel, and then they've said, right, enough's enough. I'm off to go and do my own thing. You know, Scott Snyder and Tony Daniel, for example, over at Image. And Dave, you know, you mentioned self-publishing, Kickstarters. Kickstarters are huge right now. You know, and you know that's across established as well as unestablished creators.
Yeah, Carrie Nord's Carrie Nord's just launched on Kickstarter. So yeah, everyone's it's full control over your own IP.
I remember a conversation we had a while back, Dave, when you were explaining to us. I think it was Al and I on the pod with you, how expensive and how much money you have to put up front to even get started to make one issue. So there's that challenge too for some guys who may have kind of an apprehension to using certain apps or whatever. They're local guys that live near me. They don't do any of that stuff. They don't take advantage of the technology today to put their name out there, but you just see them at shows. So that's another thing too, that sometimes you got to give FaceTime and take care of your customers as well. If you're not going to use those tools that are out there, but there's so many things that that are available today compared to 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Some of the biggest Kickstarters, still some of the record graphic novels that have been printed on Kickstarter have actually been collections of webcomics that have been running for years, and they've had such a following. I was talking to someone just the other night who made $6 million so that they could put trades out for all of their books. So it is so many different ways now to establish yourself. If you have an idea for a comic, launch a Facebook page for it and tie your Twitter account to it so you can tweet from it, Instagram account, and just build your own following as you work on it. And don't be scared to show the work. Like, oh, I want them to wait until I buy it. Like, no, just show it. So, and people, if they like it, they will want a physical copy of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is what Steve Ditko did. I mean, he put Mr. A in a fanzine, he published it himself, as far as I know, and he put his work out there and said, no, this is my work. I want my work free of any control. This is my crazy idea. And he put out Mr. A. Yeah. It's still there. You can still buy it. It's available.
Yeah, Robin Snyder runs kind of the publishing for the estate, I believe.
There you go.
Okay.
Wow, that's a lot of information. It's an interesting topic all the way around, isn't it?
I mean, we could go on. We could go on, but I understand that you want to go home, Charlie.
Well, I am
well, yeah,
and we're well above the hour mark as always.
Yeah,
and
you managed to keep it so that's good. Yeah.
Quick reminder: we will have these very short 20 minutes. We will say 20 minutes. We will see, but these very short mini episodes coming up, and we will send out a reminder on social media. You are welcome to send us your questions, and we will pick a few and tackle those as standalone topics.
We might even bring you on.
Yeah,
such an offer.
Yeah,
such an offer.
Special guest stars.
Oh, we're so generous.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much for having us on. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
No, pleasure.
For the excellent job of hosting this. Excellent. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. So don't forget to check out the UCPM for all your favorite shows, including the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where you'll find the 13th Crusader and me talking rubbish about old comics. Well, maybe not rubbish. TDC, the Definitive Crusade, for all your new DC stuff, and of course our sister show, No Prize Podcast, for everything that is Merry Marvel, including what's going to happen to the current Peter Parker.
No.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Fade to the music. Here we go. Adios.
Hasta la vista.